morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. I can see the numbers are ticking up nicely there. Neil's obviously a very popular chat, or the subject is, not to be detrimental to Neil, of course, but the subject's obviously very popular. We'll just wait until everybody shuffles into the classroom. I saw quite a lot of the eager beavers who are the front of the class people coming in early doors. But we'll wait for the people who are more like me, who are sloping in at the back of the classroom. That's where I always was. Never the first to the front of the class. I hope you're all well this morning and you're all fine. I'm just going to pop into the chat. A welcome to everybody, just to make sure the chat function is working. And also, if you can just let me know, either by using your emojis, which you'll find in your bottom bar, the thumbs up symbol, and sending me one of those, or saying hi back in the chat or whatever, then I can know that actually you can hear my audio and you can chat with me as well. Brilliant, thank you. You can use your emojis as we go throughout the webinar today. If you particularly agree with a point, or you want to express, like, clapping hands emoji, I think is that. I don't think there's a thumb down button, so I shouldn't expect to see that anyway when Neil's talking. But there's something you don't agree with. If there is now a thumbs down button, then you can use that if you want to. But also to chat with us as well. So kicking off the webinar properly, because we're now at 11:01. Good morning, everybody, properly. I'm Carly Brookfield. I'm DIA's CEO and CEO of Diamond Group as well. I don't know anywhere as near as much as someone like Neil about this topic. So I, for once, am going to be a lot quieter than I am normally. All I'm going to do is kick some questions to Neil as we go. Today's subject is an important one. It's about learning how to conduct driver assessments, whether that's for your 17-year-old pupil preparing for test, or as they're going on in their learning, you want to do some assessments on the journey to them becoming an independent driver, or you're thinking about diversifying, or you already work in things like fleet or older drivers, and you want to do some assessments with your pupils there as well. If we keep comments and viewpoints in the chat, and you can chat amongst yourselves and you can chat to me, I'll keep an eye on the chat while Neil's presenting. Specific questions, pop those in the Q&A, because then that's easier for us to drag out the questions. If it's all in the chat, the questions, we can't distinguish it very quickly from your actual chat. So questions in the Q&A, chat in the chat. I'll dance between those two functions whilst you're presenting, Neil. I'll kick you any questions that I think are urgent for that moment. Otherwise, we'll address the majority of questions at the end of the webinar today. Neil will take any questions that you've got on assessing and advanced assessment and advanced driver training. He's a very experienced trainer, and the training of trainers is where he's very experienced as well. If you have any questions that are not related to that at the end, I'm very happy to answer any questions about test waiting times, things that the DVSA are doing or not doing. I had our regular quarterly catch up with them the other day with the other associations, so there's quite a lot of information coming out shortly from that meeting. But yeah, if there's any other burning questions you've got that are not necessarily related to driver assessment today, please feel free to ask them at the end of the webinar, and we'll try and answer them best we can. We've got a few people who've got raised hands. Is that because you want to let me know anything? Pop it in the chat if you've got something that you want to tell me, or a burning point of view that you already want to share with us. Okay, but if you've got any problems during the presentation, you can't see the presentation, the sound's gone, all those kind of things, sometimes logging off and logging back on again helps things in your end. If it's an our end problem, let me know in the chat, and I'll do my best behind the scenes to restore whatever it is, sound or vision. But otherwise, Neil, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, because you know you and your expertise much better.
Okay, thank you, Carly. So good morning, everybody. My name's Neil Whiteman. I'm a audit registered driving instructor trainer. I've been that for nearly 9 years, but I'm also a regional examiner for the DIA as well, for the taxi assessments, which is another part of my role, and I really enjoy. Yeah, other than that, published author as well for Standards Checkbook as well. So yeah, that's really me, Carly, to be honest.
Great. Well, off you go with your presentation then.
Okay, so I'll just share the screen then to start with. Uh, can you see that? Can you see that, Carly, at all?
I can see that,
Yeah.
and the thumbs up
Okay.
emojis on the screen. So, yeah, that's great.
Lovely. Okay, so welcome to driver assessments and evaluations. Obviously, myself, Neil Whiteman. So we're going to be talking about what is assessing, how does an assessor evaluate a driving fault, and how do we grade faults as an instructor to prepare for our learners' tests, which are all interesting things. So first off then, the importance of high standard driver assessments. Let's look at the first question. So, why is it important to conduct high standard driving assessments? Well, my view to this is it falls into potentially four characteristics, and that is we're looking at safety, we're looking at skill evaluation, we're looking at training needs identification, and we're also looking at the public image. So, first off, then, safety. So, we're ensuring that drivers are competent and they are trying to reduce the risk of an accident, and that obviously identifies unsafe or potentially unsafe driving behaviours. With the skill evaluation, we're looking at assessments to evaluate a driver's skill comprehensively and ensuring that they meet the necessary standards of various road conditions or weather conditions, or the vehicle is also meeting them standards as well. With the training needs identification, I believe a high standard of driving assessments can highlight really major areas where drivers need improving, need additional training. And that could be just down to targeting certain little areas, but it's all about improving the driver overall. And the one that I mentioned as well, the public image. So whoever's conducting the driver assessment is really relating themselves to the image. So if it's your driving school, you know, people can see you delivering that training or that assessment, and it just looks good if the standard of driving is really, really good. So what does that high standard of driver assessments look like? Well, for me, when I'm doing taxi tests, a high standard of assessment would fall under the next few categories, and that is the candidate having a comprehensive knowledge, a thorough knowledge of understanding local traffic laws, road signs and regulations, a strong practical skills so they can maneuver proficiently, and essential driving maneuvers such as parking, lane changing, and turning, that they're doing it all correctly and it's not creating any unsafe dangers at all. Situational awareness, obviously, that includes their hazard recognition, keen ability to identify potential hazards and drive potentially defensively, creating a lot better of a standard out there. But again, safe decision making. So making sound judgments, not potentially putting people into high pressured situations where road rage is going to start to take place, but also managing the risk as well. And all these things is potentially what we should be training our students to do anyway, but also the emotional and mental preparedness for it as well. So are they calm under pressure? Are they starting to get stressful in these situations? Is that causing various mistakes to come about? And again, another category would be, are they respectful to other drivers? Which is, I feel, really important. Okay, so how can we ensure that our students are ready for test using effective assessment and mock test scenarios? Well, we can do this with establishing clear learning objectives, regulating formative assessments, creating mock tests, stimulating test conditions, and analysing their mock test results. I was talking to Carly before, and I'm going to say it now. I'm not a big believer in mock tests. So I'm going to introduce to you a different way of doing it. So how do I assess my students for a learner test? Well, I give them a postcode that I want them to drive to, which is potentially nearly always in the opposite town to where they've been learning. They have to go away and they have to find out where they're going to go, which route they're going to take, and then they can come back. And if they want me to give them directions, they need to give me the directions written down that they want to do, or they can follow the sat nav. And they can program the sat nav and they're going to follow that independently. What I'm potentially doing is assessing their ability to drive safely and independently, but they'll know whether they are test ready within about 5 to 10 minutes, because their body language will start to go, their mistakes will start to come in, and then if necessary, I can jump in and take control. I like to do that rather than doing a mock test, because I personally feel a mock test is good because it allows them to feel under pressure, but there's not potentially anything on it. But I'm more about creating post-test drivers that drive independently and safely after they've passed their driving test. And that's where I put that into play. And I believe, or I see the results coming back from that. And I'm more than happy keep on doing that rather than doing mock tests. So I'll move that on. So finding fault through assessment can be as an indicator of skill and knowledge. In the case of learners, it can also act as an indicator that they are ready to take their practical test. That's very true, but it also does the same in the way that I do it as well, where I just give them the postcode. So what are some examples of a driver fault? A driver fault is just a basic fault that somebody makes. So they might not check their mirrors once in an area where it's not really going to make much difference. There's no danger to anybody. So it would be classed as a driver fault. A serious fault is a fault where they're going to not check their mirrors potentially, but they're going to change lane. And that's going to cause somebody to stop, swerve, or change direction. And then a dangerous fault with the mirrors is potentially they move without checking the mirrors and the car is right down the side of them. And then that's going to put somebody's life at risk. And we can relate those to any fault that's on the marking sheet for a driving test. So preparation when conducting a mock test through assessing. So what should an assessment include? Consideration and preparation of the route and driving conditions for the assessment drive. So I should imagine most people do a mock test, probably do it around a test route more than an independent route. Like I say, I give mine a postcode, so they are actually using a totally different route to what they would do normally. And that's where I can actually see a benefit from that. But I don't disagree. You can use test routes for that. But I potentially see the benefit of you doing it the way I do it. And it does have its benefits as well. How long should assessment last and what should be included? Well, a driver assessment really should last between 35 and 40 minutes. and it should include various types of roads, like what, dual carriageways, towns, country roads. But it actually, if you let them decide for themselves using the postcode, it will more than likely include all the various types of roads that they're going to be driving on when they are driving post-test. And the maneuvers that you're going to put in are just the general maneuvers, so parallel park, bay parking, reverse bay parking, pull up and park on the right. And sometimes you can just generally throw an emergency stop in as well. So what other considerations should be given to conducting an assessment? Obviously, you've got to fill out a report, all the paperwork necessary for what you're doing, and get some feedback from the student as well, which is, I feel, is really, really important to do, is get their feedback on how they felt it went, what they did good, what they didn't do so well, and what they feel they can improve on. I have my own visions when I see the independent drive, so I can see what they're doing, and I can then have a conversation with them around the things that I've seen. And that's the bit I consider. And then at the end, I consider doing 15 minutes feedback with the student themselves around how they found it, what they did well. So how will you manage the risk as the assessor? Quite easily, the same as we manage the risk on a driving lesson. It's the same as we have to manage the risk for a standards check or part 3 test or anything like that. It's exactly the same. We are just managing and keeping the car safe and allowing the pupil to be in a relaxed environment and doing what they need to do safely. So, manage the risk on assessments. As an assessor, you'll need to be clear on how verbal and physical intervention plays a part in assessing. So with that, it is much the same as a driving lesson. We are managing it through verbal intervention if we need to, if they're not showing any signs of reacting, or we might just stop it as well. With a taxi test, obviously we'd be in somebody else's car with no dual controls, so it would have to be a clear verbal instruction to manage that risk as it was playing out. But with a learner, we could define the roles and responsibilities as suggested on the marking sheet. We can establish clear communication channels, and we can monitor and share accountability. That way we know who's accountable for what and what they should be doing about it. And if we're doing it clearly and outlining the assessor's roles or the instructor's roles within that, it should all fall into place, and it should be nice and smooth, and it should be a great session. The assessor must ensure shared responsibility is clear in order to manage the risk and the evaluation of the assessment. That is exactly the same as a driving lesson. We need to know what's going to happen. We need to know who's responsible for what, and we need to know how we're going to manage that risk between the two of us. Obviously, in a taxi test, it would be just a normal test, but you wouldn't share the responsibility, but you would hope that the candidate is taking responsibility for everything that they're doing. You will need to feedback effectively when appropriate to ensure your student is aware of any risk during or after the assessment drive, depending on the level of risk involved. Very true. Feedback is effective and it is appropriate. So you need to feedback really, really concisely and clear to the pupil or the candidate of what was happening and the level of risk that's involved. So if they're going to put you into danger, you need to be doing something about it quite early on. Other than that, it can be just a verbal or it can be questions and answers on the move as well. So what are the benefits of assessing? Assessing can give you a true reflection of a student's ability to drive independently. And this falls into where I was talking about earlier about not doing a mock test, but doing an independent drive. It really can give a true reflection of how a student is feeling, thinking, and driving. And it shows their ability really quickly because they've had to take responsibility for what they're doing and how they're doing it. Some students, with the way that I do it, drive for about 10 minutes and it starts to get too much. And the next word you hear is help, I need help me out with this. And that clearly shows to them that they're not ready to take that test because they're not able to make the decisions on what they're going to do. On a mock test, you could stop that if you needed to, or you could just pull them over. But with the way that I'm doing it and assessing it, I can actually pull them over and get them to breathe for a little bit and then move off and carry on doing it all independently. See if that changes what is happening. Assessing allows the instructor to evaluate if a student is ready for test and manage their expectations effectively. That's very true, and we all have difficult conversations sometimes with learner drivers. I believe, and I do believe that the way that I do it, they manage their own expectations because they realize when or how or if they are ready for tests themselves. And that does take a lot of pressure off me as an instructor to get them to realize that themselves rather than me having that difficult conversation.
I was just about to say, actually, Neil, do you see that as a benefit of doing the assessments? That if you've got potentially a pupil or parent who's not accepting they're not ready, if you can demonstrate you've done some form of assessment, it's giving you a level of evidence or rationale to be able to go back to them and say, look, I've done an assessment. They are not ready, within the boundaries of this assessment that I've done, but given the criteria that I'm assessing against.
Yeah, it works really well because 9 times out of 10, you can ask parents to come in and do that. They can sit in the back and watch and see themselves. Or the student will go back to mum and dad and say, I'm clearly not ready for this because I couldn't manage to do the task that he set me. And it just helps you get over that difficult conversation, shall we say.
Yeah.
You know, inviting parents in when they're doing these independent assessments is great benefit because a lot of parents see it firsthand and realize that, okay, we need to do more work or they need to do more work.
Yeah.
And sometimes it encourages parents to actually take their child out and do some driving with them as well, because that helps create independence as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. No, I just thought that was that that's a really good benefit of that when you've got a really difficult conversation because somebody just won't accept what's being told to them. If you can show them, look, we've assessed you, you're just not ready at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, and you can, there's other ways you can do it as well. You sometimes, if students are happy, I'll record it as well. So I've got a dual camera, so it'll record inside and outside. And if they agree and the parents are happy for that, can record it as well. And the parents can see from video evidence that it is just not the right time to take the test. So it's worth having a play with it. It's worth investigating and seeing what sort of benefits you get yourselves from that. But I really like it, and that's why I'm a big believer in it, to be quite honest. Okay, so assessing allows the instructor to see how the student manages under pressure and how they can cope with their nerves when being assessed under test conditions. I think the way that I do it allows them to feel more comfortable. It allows them to cope better because they know that they're doing it for themselves. I understand that people get really nervous about tests and even mock tests. Nobody likes being assessed. Nobody likes being observed when they're driving, and and it just does create a level of tension within the car. But if you try my way of thinking, you might see that there is a difference in the way that the pupils do cope with their nerves, and then they can start to understand what they can do when they're sat with the examiner as well. And it can change their mindset and turn it into a growth mindset as well, which sometimes is more than a benefit as well, because it allows them to be more confident. And there's various other the ways out there, but it's just allowing the student to grow themselves, and it allows the instructor to be more open with the student, but it mainly it allows them to set responsibility for their own learning, which is a massive benefit. Okay, so thank you for attending today's webinar. Carly, is there any questions out there?
There is indeed some
Oh my
questions.
God.
So, good. People are engaged and they're interested, and they think you're giving some good advice there. On the postcode approach to assessments,
Yeah.
one of the members is asking, do you get them to plan their own route, or do you set that as the task?
All I do is when they say to me, "Are you ready to? Oh, can I book a driving test?" I'll give them a postcode that I want them to go away and research, and that's probably in the next town, like I said. So where I live in Inkley. Our next town is Nuneaton. So I will give them a postcode that's going to be about 35 minutes away from where we start the lesson, and they have to go away and plan themselves through the week for the next session. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does to me. But if it doesn't to anybody else, just let us know. And another member is asking, how do you deal with clients who have been encouraged to have a go and see what happens on the day? By parents or themselves going, I'll just go off and do it. How do you deal with that particular challenge?
Uh, I've never really come across that, to be quite honest. Everybody understands why I'm doing it, because it's for their own benefit. And I think they're more inclined to go away and give it a go. If I say they're going to do a mock test, they all of a sudden, oh God, can't do that sort of thing. Can't do a test, can't do a test. But it just creates that different environment to allow them to try.
Yeah. So if you market it, I suppose, in a proactive, kind of way, they're more likely to take up the offer than those who are like, no, thanks, I'm all right. I'm just going to go to the test center,
Yeah,
and try and fly by the seat of my pants.
yeah. Give it a go, see what happens. It can't do any harm, can it?
No.
It can't do any harm.
And another question is, would you do this as well if a pupil came to you with an imminent test book? So it wasn't your pupil, you might have taken them on board midstream or towards the end of their learning from an instructor, and they've got a test book. Would you be suggesting that you would do some kind of assessment with them in general anyway to see where they are?
Uh, yeah, I would do a general assessment when I first took them on. to see where they are. I wouldn't give them a postcode to drive to because I want to see their standard of driving first. So I would probably just give them some directions and spend 20 minutes just seeing what their level of driving ability is. Working through a few more lessons, then I might try it with them. Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't tend to take people's students that are mid-test or getting test ready. I like to take them from the start
Yeah.
and build my own relationship with the students to make it easier to introduce. Yeah, if
But if
that
you
makes sense.
if you're in the mode of doing more regular assessments with pupils and you have a format for doing that, I suppose if you did get a pupil who's changed instructor for various reasons, they might just have had a really bad experience instructor, doing an assessment as a kind of first step allows you to get an insight into that pupil a bit quicker than they're just you're starting them on the path of training with you. You can pick up a lot of things from that assessment that'll help you develop their training plan.
Yeah, any assessment will give you a really great idea of what their weaknesses are. You know, uh, I also introduce sometimes if it's a new student from another instructor, I might send them a strengths and weaknesses form to see what they feel their strengths are and what their weaknesses are, and how does that tie up when we do the assessment. Does that actually say exactly what they've said, or does it highlight different areas for improvement? So yeah, I'm a little bit different, I think. I like to try new things.
I think because we're in a different world though at the moment, aren't we? That we're getting you're getting more people as instructors generally with the test waiting time pressure, that you're getting more people than ever coming to you with a test book and in a panic. So actually trying to get as many of these people to undergo some form of assessment is critical really to you understanding where they are and their readiness, and to illustrate to them that however frightened they are of letting go of that slot for fear of not getting another one for 6 months, they are going to go, they are possibly going to fail, and doing this mini assessment helps demonstrate that, and they're going to be going back into the system and waiting for 6 months anyway to get a retest. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think it's really useful to be able to do that. Oh
I
God, lots
think
of
it's
questions.
also I think it's also important as well. Uh, I'm not particularly keen on letting my £25,000 car go off when I don't believe that they're going to be successful. So that's why, as well, I introduced it as well, so that they know that they're capable of bringing that car back on that test in
Yeah,
full working order.
yeah, yeah. With the waiting times currently as they are, what is the best time to let them book their test? This particular instructor said they currently do this when they're independent. So the later stages of their learning is when they will actually book the test, when they've graduated to that level of independent driving. But then obviously the pressure is on at the moment, because if you wait that much longer, you're still going to have a big wait of 4 to 6 months coming down the line. And consumer behavior for booking tests is this panic buying now before you're actually ready, and starting to book a lot earlier in the cycle than traditionally pupils would.
Yeah, I mean, there is conversations that you've got to have out there with your students. How soon would I do it? Once I've worked through the syllabus, once I feel that they're capable, then I might just give them a quick assessment to see where they are with using the postcode, because it'll become evident quite quickly whether they can or they can't do it. You know, when people are being watched, that they can make mistakes straight away. Some people can cope with that, but you get a good feeling, but your student will get that self feeling that they're not ready if they do their assessments. But it'd be good to see what everybody else's feedback if they go away and try it, to see what it comes back like.
Yeah. A couple of like practical questions for you there. Recommendations for a dual camera, because you referenced using a dual camera to be able to give that the pupil the perspective of their driving as well as what's happening in the external environment.
Yeah, okay. So I use a thing called dual cam, which is an app on my iPhone.
Oh,
It's two screens in one, and you can swap them around so you can have the pupil or the road, whichever way you want it. That's the one I tend to use. I would say if you're going to use that, please get it signed for to say that they're happy to use it because of
yeah.
GDPR. I do tell parents that this is what I'm planning to do. Uh, are you happy for me to do that with your student? I'm not going to share it anywhere. We can delete it afterwards if you want, but it'll just give you a visual of where the people are.
Great, and I've just checked that out whilst you've been chatting. So dual cam, everybody is. I'll pop it in the chat as well. It's available in the Google Store, Google App Store, and it's available in the Apple Store as well. So you'll be able to get that. And I think you'll see some other versions of dual cam, or mixed cam is another one that does dual filming. But as Neil very rightly says, at the very top of training, when you're onboarding a pupil, there should be some disclaimers being signed by pupils that they are happy for any monitoring and any processing of their data. That they are signing that they're okay with you processing their data. There's lots of information on that, and from the Information Commissioner's Office. And I mean, as a business, you should register with the Information Commissioner's Office because you are processing data as a business. And I think it's at 35, 40 odd pounds a year to be registered, but they will also give you lots of advice about your responsibilities for processing data. And it doesn't matter whether you've got a Rolodex or a digital file with just names and addresses in it, that is considered processing data. If you then start adding photography of pupils holding up their test certificate or video of training and sessions in the car, that is even more data, and you are even more vulnerable in terms and responsible for protecting that data. And you think that maybe your professional indemnity cover is generally used for things like accidents that happen in training and injuries that happen there and things like that. Actually, a lot of the claims we get on the professional indemnity are about protecting people and defending claims that pupils have brought against driving instructors that have lost their data or allowed it to get into the hands of third parties by not storing it electronically enough and safely, or sharing it on Facebook without their permission. And it's holding up a test certificate, zoom in, I can see all your details on that test certificate, and you haven't got my permission to share all my details. So any information you're gathering about pupils, any images of them, any video of their training, make sure you've got a disclaimer signed off when you first onboard them as a pupil for the use of all of that, and make sure you're on top of how you store, because that is as much of a risk to your business, your livelihood, as your pupil, ramming a car into a wall.
Very much so, yeah.
And there was another recommendation being looked for a programmable sat nav for mock test alternatives, which simulate actual practical tests. Do you know anything about that, Neil?
No. The only one is the TomTom 52 that the examiners use, where you can record routes on it. That's the only one I know.
Okay.
I do also, I do have a TomTom 52 and I do use it, but I also use the one in the car because it's different, the one that's built into the vehicle,
Mm-hmm.
because it gives different direction instructions. So I do flip from the two as well to get them used to using different sat navs.
Anthony asks, what do you think about the apps? Anthony, do you mean in terms of the theory test apps, or what? If you wouldn't mind popping into the Q&A, what type of apps you meant specifically? Matt asks, I find people who can drive but then crack under test pressure a common problem. That people are competent drivers, but nerves get to them. Do you have any additional tips or advice to help with test nerves and helping your pupils with test nerves?
No, unfortunately. Uh, it's just one of those. I feel if I can make them more confident by thinking about post-test driving, maybe that lowers the nerves on the test. But we're all individuals, we're all human beings, and we all deal with pressure in a different way. If it was me taking a standards check or an audit inspection, I'd be really nervous for the first 3 days. But when I get to the session, for the 5 minutes before, I kick into action and I just do it. So it's, yeah, we all deal with it in a different way, unfortunately.
I
So
mean, there's a lot of chat about in the wider driver trainer community, starting to develop now about how mindfulness techniques can actually help some pupils. So encouraging your pupils, and you to a certain extent, to look into mindfulness. It might sound like it's some very, holistic, hippy dippy-ish kind of nonsense, but actually throughout professional life now in the corporate world, and in scenarios like this, it can really have its benefits for, employees, employers, pupils, people going through stressful times at work, undergoing assessment. So maybe we've got a mindfulness course coming up that's an introduction to mindfulness, and I think that might be useful for trainers to get on board with, to be able to help pupils with mindfulness techniques as well.
and just
Um,
as you're talking, Carly, I've just put up that course for you. Look,
oh,
Introduction to Mindfulness.
bless you, Neil. You're on brand there, aren't you? Um, Another question from Michael: evaluating older drivers, and different types of driver than the traditional learner. So someone who hasn't driven for years, may not have driven for many years. I'm thinking of the stereotype of the lady who's widowed, husband has done a lot of the driving, just because that generational thing. I don't let my partner drive as much because he's a bad driver. I'm the driver in our family. But they're underconfident. What is your first step with an older driver client?
Uh, they're more the ones that I'll share that strengths and weaknesses with. Just get a piece of paper and just get them to write down what they feel their strengths and weaknesses are. And then just do just a general drive around the town where they live to start with and see what comes up. Uh, because they're older and they've been driving before, they might just reduced in confidence or whatever. So they know how to drive. So it's just about finding out what they can do, what they can't do, and then improving the training from there on in. And that's the way I
So
tend to do it.
I suppose, any medical questions as well with anything that, the aging unfortunately does give us more medical problems, and it hampers some of our abilities. So just being mindful of sensitively asking some questions about, do they feel that, they've got any issues that might stop them concentrating for longer periods or make them too reactive, and maybe looking into, some of the typical attributes of older drivers, some of their risks, but also some of their benefits, because we talk about all drivers being risky. They're actually less risky in many respects because they start to self-police and keep themselves off the road in risky situations. So my 82-year-old mother will not drive at night, and she won't drive on unfamiliar roads because she doesn't feel confident there. So there's an element of self-policing, but talking to them about their fears and things like that might be a first step, as well as getting to know their cognitive challenges, medical challenges, anything like that. I
Yeah.
think a, a form of assessment that I'd like to see more in the industry actually doing, and I know some of you do, but it's not widespread, is actually getting to know your pupil before they come and drive with you for the first time by developing a questionnaire and basically pupil profiling. And I've done a webinar about this before. I've done presentations about it before. Maybe we'll bring that webinar back. And I'll put together a representative questionnaire, which is about gathering lots of information about your pupil before they've even got in the car. Because it's a bit of a strange industry, isn't it? We
Yeah.
go and meet this strange person, and we let them go in our very expensive vehicle, and then we're exposed to being in a very close proximity to them and delivering this training, and we know nothing about them sometimes we're meeting them for the first time. I think doing pupil profiling, gathering lots of information, is a safety thing for you, but also helps you start planning that client-centered journey ahead of the game. And you're
Yeah.
also not wasting time, as far as they and you are concerned, doing that at the side of the road in the first lesson. So
Yeah.
we'll
I,
bring back that webinar. Maybe me and Neil will do that.
I think that's important as well, because what I do teach PDIs to do is pretend that they've got a blank piece of paper when they meet somebody for the first time, and just ask open questions, anything to do with not driving. So find out what their hobbies are, where they go to college, what they're studying at college, what they like to do when they're not at college or when they're at work or whatever, just to build up a picture. And it is just like you say, it's just having a blank piece of paper in front of you, and you find out as much as you can about the student before you start talking about driving.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I'll pull together, because I've been promising to do this for a while, an idea of the kind of pupil profiling questionnaire that I would do. It's also an excellent risk management tool. When I worked in private and investment banking, we were regulated to do KYC, know your client. So
Mm.
again, the black paper approach, we couldn't even start suggesting solutions to clients until we'd done our KYC, because we had to suggest solutions that were attributed to their level of risk and their vulnerability to risk and their understanding of financial products. So you couldn't just plow in there with everything you had. You had to make sure it was appropriate for that person. So I think, this is a really important element of the onboarding of people, but it's also a really practical element of the onboarding. And also, if there is ever any issues with an indemnity or liability claim, if you've done this pre-screening of pupils to make sure you've got a lot of information about them, and that's how you'll deliver their training, and you're aware of the risks of that particular pupil, that will help when it comes down to those kind of claims and legal defense as well. Yeah, I think that would be something that we'd like to see more of, but it's up to us to help you, develop questionnaires that are good to use. Peter says it strikes him that you need to start assessments earlier than 4 weeks from tests, so you've got time to market future assessments. Would it help to start doing assessments with pupil earlier, maybe mini assessments as they take on blocks of learning, I suppose, and they progress?
Yeah. I mean, it's as soon as you start sat nav training, you can start doing mini assessments, because that is sat nav training is potentially driving independently with listening to the directions, isn't it? So you could start putting in mini assessments then, just getting them for drive from one postcode to another, somewhere that they probably know as well. And then you could then say, right, okay, how do you feel about doing this next week? And give them that further distance to go.
Tony had a good idea in terms of GDPR. Would it be better to use a pupil phone to record lessons? Because that should avoid GDPR, because it's their data being processed on their phone. So, encouraging them, if they want to have dual cam on their phones and record the lesson when you do assessments.
Uh, I'm not quite sure, because I'm not sure where they're going to share that information, or what they
Yeah.
might do with it.
You might then have your own GDPR challenges as an instructor, that, if you allow them to have it on their phone and they've recorded it, what are they doing with that recording as well? And do you want them to be sharing that with their friends? Great, if you're a great instructor, you have no problem, you think it's a good advert for you, but they would then be processing your data as well. So I think I would have the catch-all of something they sign off when they first come into training with you, that I used to work in further education, and every pupil that entered the college on their enrolment form would have to sign off that they were happy that we took photographs around the college and used them in our prospectuses, and if we videoed on campus with the media coming in, that they were happy for their images to be used or not. And then we had to deselect those pupils if we were ever filming or taking photos. So I think I would get all this stuff done up front, and then that you're covered, as it were, in terms of
Mm.
the pupil that's given permission. It's part of the onboarding process for me. Um,
I mean,
and
you
the,
don't have to use the video. You can just do a quick assessment like without it. The pupil will know whether they're test ready or not quite quickly.
are there any resources anyone or Neil can recommend on how to grade a test marking sheet? So how to grade the whole assessment? Any kind of forms or assessment templates that you would recommend?
Uh, no, I believe we all have the ability to know what's the fault. We all been through a part two driving test, so we should know what's required. Uh, that's where I'm working off, is part two driving tests and examining for the DIA as well, off the marking form there as well. So,
Okay. Well, we might look. I mean, our templates we could share, which are the Diamond Advanced Test Framework, and it is useful in some respects, because out of all the advanced testing brands, Diamond is the only one to base its examining system on Cardington. The others use Roadcraft. So ours is the closest to a Cat B, pre-test assessment. But we could also maybe in an extended session, I'm thinking, this is clearly a very interesting session for people. So I think maybe this could be a classroom day that we do at some point, Neil. We could maybe look to put together some example templates, because we all love a template, don't we? It's not because we're too lazy or we can't think to do it ourselves. It's just getting a template that somebody's already put together is a lot easier, and it's that check. Oh, yes, I am doing the right things here. So maybe we'll show some examples of that based on an advanced one, maybe one for an older driver, maybe one for fleet, so people can see what kind of things we're looking for. Stuart asks, in mock tests, he faces in difficulty. So he will level up the tests as time goes on. So he'll be, asking them to do one thing, and the next assessment will be more difficult. First one might be shorter with the prescribed test time and no manoeuvres. Second might be longer and include a manoeuvre. At the end of the process, he offers an extended test with a higher grade to pass. Any thoughts from you on that approach? Sounds good to me.
It sounds good. Yeah, it sounds. You know what I like about that is thinking out the box, and that's what I've done with giving them a postcode is thinking outside the box, and it sounds like he's doing the same there. You know, we've got to create different things to try and get these students ready for post-test driving. And there's probably no better way than a harder test after a harder test. You know, that yeah, I think that's great. Hello, are you there, Carly? It looks like Carly's dropped out. Hello, Sidra, are you there? So just going through, just going through some of the more questions if there is any. Yeah. Okay. So has anybody got any more questions? I can only see. Not sure where Carly had got to be quite honest. Yeah, I think we are. Oh, you're back, Carly.
I'm back. Sorry about that, folks. My Wi-Fi dropped out, so it
That's,
happened.
I'll just stop this share. So yeah, so I was just trying to go through any more questions, and I weren't sure where you'd got to. So
With me dropping out, unfortunately, unless Sidra can rescue the questions, we can't see any of the questions now. So that's a bit of a shame. If you haven't had your question answered, can I ask a favor? And huge apologies about this. Just, I wasn't supposed to be babysitting today's webinar. Neil's perfectly competent, but we normally have somebody from DIA doing that. We've had to, the person who was babysitting it, Karen, has had to go off and do some examiner training herself physically. I'm actually on holiday in Portugal at the moment. I was asked if I could babysit, and I haven't got the Wi-Fi I would normally have at home. So please accept my apologies. But if you haven't had your question answered, please stick that in the Q&A, and we will try and tackle that, or send it on to help@diaacademy.co.uk afterwards, and we'll forward that on to Neil or me if you need to have an answer to that. There is an attendee who's also asking, is there a recommended template specific to assessing driving strengths and weaknesses that you mentioned, or is it just as you do a blank piece of paper and you write down their weaknesses and their strengths?
yeah, I send a blank piece of paper, shall I say? It's got strengths and weaknesses at the top, and I just get them to write down what they feel their strengths are. They might write down 2 or 3, or might suggest that they write down 10, and then 10 weaknesses as well. It's
You could use a swap. I know that sounds weird, but you could use a SWOT because it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Strengths and weaknesses. So it's the quadrant of boxes, the 4 boxes, your strengths, your weaknesses. You could look at threats and they could be related to the weakness, or they could be related to threats in general. As in, if you don't get on top of this weakness, it's going to continue to be a threat, or the threat will manifest itself and you won't be able to deal with it. And opportunities are, what are the opportunities for learning that you've got going forward? Where should you focus in now? And obviously all of that, as anybody working in any training context will say, has got to be a praise sandwich. It's got to be, focus on the positive as much as the weaknesses. But yeah, SWOT might be a way of doing it as well.
Yeah, yeah. Anything, to be quite honest, it's it's just out your own preference as well to find in your own little way that works for you. And that's potentially what I've done, is found a way that I believe works for me, and it's
Yeah.
comfortable. So
Stuart,
yeah.
I love you. He says, I use DIA's mock test papers because my clients like having a record. Yes. Gives a nice plug. Yes, we do, I think, have DIA mock test papers in the shop. I think we also have some cameras in the shop at the moment. We're always looking for recommendations though of other cameras and other stuff that we could be producing and putting into the DIA shop. And as I said, I'll look into developing some free kind of pupil profiler templates and get my more learned colleagues like Neil to oversee those and see what other things we should be asking as well. I look at it from the risk management perspective, because obviously providing everybody with a £25 million cover of professional damage public liability and having to arrange that cover every year and seeing my claims profile, I'm anxious that we do as much as we can do to manage risk in the training environment. So that's good. So I'm just going to move on. Thank you so much for that, Neil. It's clearly a very interesting topic. You did beat Dr. Sean Hellman in terms of attendees today, so you were very popular, and you didn't upset anybody like Sean managed to do the other week. So that's good as well. You weren't as controversial as you thought you were going to be with your I don't really like mock testing approach. And interesting enough, myself and Neil, he said, can I be controversial in this webinar? And I said, well, yeah, we want people to have an opinion and be thought leaders. And he said, well, I don't really agree with mock testing per se. And we all get why he means that now. But I was just saying to him, there is a level of hypocrisy with DVSA in a way, going, do mock test, do mock test, do mock test. But don't be just cribbing people to pass the driving test and test routes. And it's just like, well, you are kind of telling people to do that by doing a mock test, doing a mock test. What they need to be sending out as a message, and I'll have a word with them about this messaging, is more do mock assessments that will help them prepare for real life independent driving. That's the messaging that should be going out. Otherwise, it does look a very hypocritical message about cribbing people for a test. But do more of those, please. I'll just take a few last questions before we go, because I know these are hot topics about test waiting times. We had a meeting with DVSA on Tuesday, our regular catch-up, myself and the 2 other association heads that form the National Association Strategic Partnership. The report and minutes have just been circulated to me, and until we all sign those off, I can't go into too much detail, because DVSA also needs to sign off what's discussed in those meetings as stuff we're allowed to share publicly. But obviously, the big hot topic in that meeting for us was test waiting times. What are you doing to bring those down? And we're all aware of the fact that the start of this year, Q1, things seem to be working with their remedies, or their attempts at remedies. Bringing staff to the front lines seem to have an impact. Test times, waiting times were going down. We were getting down to about 14 weeks. But then in July, clearly we started jumping back up again to 18.4 weeks. And what will have exacerbated that is not all staff have returned to their former roles, but a big tranche of those 230 odd people who were transferred to the front lines to do testing have been returning to their original roles. So that resource has gone back to its original jobs. They're getting on with their recruitment strategy for examiners. The challenge that I put to them is it's not that attractive. We are in a very active environment for instructors at the moment. Demand is high. Post-COVID, we've been able to raise lesson prices. You look at the package for a driving examiner with DVSA, knowing what the work and the stress load is and working for DVSA, and the salary attached to it is not that attractive. So your core recruitment ground for an examiner role should be ADIs. But ADIs aren't necessarily interested in this role at the moment. So what are you going to do to make the role more attractive? And they said they have some plans to look at new media campaigns and now, you'll forgive my cynicism on that. I'm a marketeer and a communications person by background. you can do a brilliant marketing campaign, but if your product isn't great, it's still not going to sell. So for me, they do need to look at paying conditions of that role to make it more attractive. And there's no point doing marketing campaigns that are brilliant if that core package doesn't look good to people. But they are trying to do more. They've expedited the training process, which is something that we've been saying as Diamond. They asked us for some help during the COVID crisis at its peak about, could Diamond supply examiners? Could we help with the training examiners? We looked at their training program. We said, it's too long. You're going to have to expedite it. You need to get people through it quicker. My view is you also need to be employing more part-time examiners. You need more mobile, flexible examiner workforce, because you've got these ebbs and flows of demand. And part-time examiner work would be appealing to lots more people than a full-time role with DVSA looks like it is at the moment. So, they are looking at how they can do better recruitment. Some of the other suggestions we made to them, I had an idea, and I'm interested to know what you guys think of this, is that the problem is pupils are holding on to test slots and going when they're not ready for fear of not getting another test slot for 6 months. Is there something we can do to incentivize pupils who are not ready to give up their test slot, either by offering them guaranteed dates and test centres for when they feel they are ready, as in they'll get priority booking access, or something else? Is there a carrot we can give them to give up that test slot if they're not ready? So, what I would call a slot swap scheme. So I'm interested in people, you can write to me separately, you can show me with in the chat here. Interestingly, DVSA didn't immediately say, like they can sometimes, we can't do that, and that's a stupid idea. They went, oh, that's interesting. We'll take that away. Would you ask your members if they think that would be a good thing to do? I'm just trying to desperately remember. Another radical idea that I had was that the booking system should be closed to only ADIs to make bookings of tests. And that's something we've done before as a temporary solution. And we appear to be in a situation where test waiting times are going up rather than down. And do we need to even temporarily bring that restriction back into being? And even more radically, should we be thinking anyway that generally only ADIs should be able to book driving tests for people? That's a radical thought, that should we change the whole system so that's the way that it is? And we discussed some other ideas as well. They should come out in the report, but they were asking us for our thoughts. They were telling us what they'd been doing. They're still battling with the bots. My biggest challenge to that is, a few years ago, your new chief executive came into post, and one of the first things she said she was going to do was put in a capital expenditure bid for a whole new booking system, because it was clear that was the big thing that was hampering DVSA's delivery, was an antiquated booking system that falls over, doesn't provide lots of information, all of those problems. It doesn't provide what you should need. I've asked for things like heat maps, being able to see in live real data, all of us being able to see where are the hotspots for test booking times. Their current system cannot provide that live data. That's ridiculous in this day and age. They should be able to do that. And there's lots of problems, and the bots are getting in because it's a rubbish booking system and it's not robust. So there is a platform project that has been developed that is looking at what driving test system, booking system they should have in the future. But we're talking quite a long-winded project. Government bodies are not very good at doing IT projects, and they spend a long time bringing them to fruition. Commercial operators, we can do it a lot quicker. But there is, at least the plan has started to do that work, but don't expect a quick win in that. And then there are other ideas that we discussed as well. So keep your ideas coming as to how we can tackle it, because don't think that they've got all the solutions there. And you can come up with something what sounds crazy. It's worth throwing it out there, because if it makes us think of other things we can be doing, and the more radical ideas are sometimes the things that we need to be doing, but some of the stuff that they've been doing so far is clearly limited in its impact if we're seeing waiting times slipping backwards again.
Maybe it's time for privatisation.
Well, the other thing we said to them about resourcing, the agency is not very good at resourcing. And maybe when you can't do the need to do's like Cat B testing, you need to look at the things that you don't actually need to do yourself, DVSA, and outsourcing those. So one area that I've suggested a number of times to them is they should outsource ADI testing. Part 2 and Part 3 tests don't need to be done by DVSA. The entire ADI qualification does not need to be delivered by DVSA. They looked at modernising driver training. They looked at the idea of having external bodies who would deliver the qualification, and then PDIs would take their certification to show they had passed the qualification, and DVSA would purely license. There are organisations out there, and of course I'm speaking with a level of interest here. We run a commercial, testing organisation throughout the world. There are organisations that could deliver testing far more agilely than DVSA. And I'll give you an example. We went to DVSA and told them that their taxi testing was just not good enough. They were really struggling with delivery, and that organisations like us could take it on board. They dropped it to the market. We picked up a lot of that business. Their turnaround time used to be 14 weeks, 20 weeks for a taxi test. We deliver in 5 days from booking. So I'm not saying it's not challenging, because we're always chasing examiners, as Neil will tell you, but there are other operators that can deal with these things more agilely than DVSA do, and that frees up resources for DVSA to concentrate on the things that they can do well if they didn't have all these other tests to satisfy. So I think there's lots of radical ideas that can be put forward, and don't necessarily think they're not going to get listened to. Channel them through the right bodies. I'm happy to ask the questions. I'm happy to raise the challenges. They are struggling, and they're more open than ever to suggestions. And we've obviously got a new government in charge who are also putting that pressure onto them. They've met with a new minister recently, very, very briefly, but her first questions to them were all around test delivery. That's the biggest concern. So they're certainly under the pressure to do that at the moment. I'm conscious of time has moved on. There's lots of questions and lots of comments. Really grateful for those. I am reading as I'm talking, so I am taking your thoughts on board here. It's good to see some of my ideas you think are good ones, so I'll keep asking them. I'm your mouthpiece. You tell me what you want to be coming out of my mouth. I've got ideas of my own, but I want to test them with you, and you give me other ideas. So I want you to use me as a mouthpiece. So I'm Carly Brookfield at driving.org. If you've got things you want to say to me directly, or you can get me through any of our other channels. But, to talk to us, let us know what you want us to be raising. The report should come out of that meeting soon, so you'll see some of the things in there. Some stuff is embargoed because it's very sensitive stuff. They just want to test out with a small group and get our opinions on. They don't want to necessarily go to a larger consultation initially if it's just an initial idea. They don't want to, give people hope that something's going to happen when it can't, or it's a really bad idea and we shoot it down first so they don't look like idiots in front of the whole world. But yeah, so look, keep your questions coming, keep your challenges coming, keep going. I know it's really difficult. The one statement I made in the meeting the other day when they were saying, oh, there's this problem, and can you talk to your members about this, and can you talk to, well, I said, I'm not paid to do your communications. I do them because they're a benefit for our members, but don't chase me on doing stuff that is your job. And the other thing I said is the mood isn't great out there. ADIs are under massive pressure, and ADI trainers are as well, because they've got the same problems. They can't get tests for their pupils either. And, we're all wondering when there is going to be better days coming, and everybody's anxious to know, what are you doing to get on top of this? What can be done? And are you open to ideas of how we can improve the whole situation? Look out for that report, and then you can see what we're talking about. And in the meantime, keep in touch with us and trust us. We are asking the same questions that you're asking us, and we are beating the drum very loudly as well. Okay, so I'm going to end the webinar now. This will be available in the DIA Academy webinars section in about 24 hours. It just takes some time for a video of this size to come down the line, as it were. Thank you so much, Neil. You have been very clearly one of our most popular speakers. So we'll take that away and we'll do something else on assessments. I think we could very easily develop a day's training on different types of assessment that people could do. Thank you to everybody that's come along today. You're such busy people. I am very grateful that you actually give time to our webinars as well. A survey is going out very shortly asking you what other webinar topics, what other training we could do, what time of day works best for you in terms of training. So please answer that survey so we can tailor our program to better meet the needs of busy working ADIs, rider trainers, whatever world you're working in driver training. But thanks, Neil. And hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. You'll all be busy doing assessments today, won't you, after that?
Get some feedback, send some feedback in, because that'd be really useful, that would, wouldn't it?
Do us an assessment. You can do an assessment of me and Neil, and how we've done today. We like feedback. All right, take care, everybody, and have a good day. Bye,
All
Neil.
right.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye.